Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and we're in the last sessions of the first day of the 2014 Homeschool Plus Conference. Amos Blanton is here. Amos, welcome.
Thank you.
Amos is the project manager for the Scratch online community at MIT Media Lab. He designs and maintains creative communities for people who love learning. Prior to joining the Scratch team, he worked as an advisor at the Not Back to School camp, a humanistic psychotherapist and blimp ground crewman. So do you know Blake outside of this?
Yes, I do, because we've both worked at Not Back to School camp before at the same session, so yeah.
How fun. He's excited by the maker movement and designing maker spaces that support community and creative collaboration. A couple of quick things. We are going to do a makereducation.com crowdsourced conference like this in January, which will be a lot of fun. And then, did you also read the Teenage Liberation Handbook? Was that what got you to Not Back to School camp?
Yeah, actually it was a collaboration between Grace Llewellyn and my stepmother, Amy Silver, and they co-wrote a book called Guerrilla Learning together. And my sister had been going to Not Back to School camp for a while as well. And so there's a lot of familial connections, and I started in 2002, mostly because I didn't really have much better to do. But the first year that I went to camp, it really blew my mind and got me to read all the books and get interested in unschooling. So that's how I started in it.
Okay, so you just blew my mind. Amy Silver is your stepmother?
That's right, yeah.
Oh, what a fun connection. Delightful.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Okay, our thanks to Homeschool Life, G3, and Home Education Magazine for supporting and promoting the conference. Special thanks to Blackboard Collaborate for continuing to be just such a great, stable platform. So those of you who are in the live audience, this is a chance to indicate where you're participating from. If you're going to look to the left of the map, you'll see some icons. The second one down is a star or a sun. Click on it twice, then click on the map. You can also put a note in the chat. Let us know where you are, time, temperature, weather, anything like that. Piyush continues to make us international, and Maisie as well. Piyush and Maisie, why don't you put the time in so we all can applaud you for staying up so late? I'm just going to guess. I'm thinking at 2:30 in India.
Whoa. Just
after midnight in Israel. Anyway, we appreciate you. Amos, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm here to help.
Great. Thanks a lot. This talk's called Digital Tools for Learners with Agency, and I'm going to touch on Scratch, which is a project I've been working on for the last 5 years. Constructionism, which is a sort of the theoretical foundation for Scratch that informs what we do here in the Lifelong Kindergarten group, which is the group at MIT Media Lab that creates and maintains Scratch. And then also the maker movement, which has a lot of kind of connections and affinities. And this is something that a talk I've been thinking about giving at Not Back to School camp for a while. I haven't made it over there yet, but so I thought, hey, here's a nice opportunity, because I've always felt that there are a lot of affinities between some of the values that drive the work that we do here and unschooling. So when I came from unschooling over here, it really wasn't that hard of a transition. People thought the same way about a lot of things. So let's see. So this is actually a slide that that my boss, the director of the Lifelong Kindergarten group, Mitchell Resnick, and really the sort of the main force behind Scratch, or one of the main people behind Scratch, shows when he talks about what it is that we're trying to do. And this slide is a sort of a depiction of conventional schooling in some ways. So there's a professor here, and he's mentioning a whole bunch of random equations, and they're going through a funnel into the student's head. So that's a kind of a model of learning that we are really trying to call into question and to push back against as well. And I think that's sort of the start of a shared value there. So what we are trying to do instead is basically saying that we like the way that learning happens in kindergarten. And then kindergarten is a pretty understandable metaphor for a lot of people to understand, they've had experiences with it, and often their kids are in it. So in kindergarten, the way it often works, or at least maybe it used to before kindergarten got more and more kind of structured, But the way I like that it worked was that there are, blocks in one corner, and there are crayons and magic markers and finger paints in another, and there's a fish tank over in another. And the kids are invited to go and explore whichever of those kinds of tools that they want to. And they learn from the process of interacting and building with these bricks, from working and interacting with the finger paints and the crayons. And we think that that's a powerful way of learning. And in some ways, the structure of MIT Media Lab as a graduate school is very much more similar to kindergarten than it is to compulsory schooling. Because graduate students that come here are essentially, there's obviously some direction that we have to have some shared direction, but really they're supposed to be able to drive a lot of the development and the learning of what it is that they love and what brought them here based on their own authentic interests. So we think that it kind of works in kindergarten fairly well in most of them, and we think it works pretty well in Media Lab graduate school. The problem is really in between. That's where I think that there's a lot of sort of problems, and we want to try to influence that and the way people think about education. So the basic philosophy here is, I'll go through it really simply, this is called sort of the imagination circle. So the way it works is that we want people to be imagining, like and maybe you're thinking about in kindergarten, I want to draw something. Okay, I'll get the crayon, then I'll create something. I'll draw the truck that I created. And then maybe I'll play with it. And then I can share it with my friends. What do they think about this thing that I made? And then I'll kind of think about it. Oh, yeah, well, what was cool or what didn't work? And then I imagine again. So you see it's a spiral that's kind of continually going on. It's in what's called an iterative process. And this is sort of the core of what we call design-based thinking. And this really can apply to a lot of different things. Creating with Legos often works this way. You start to get something together, and then you sort of hold it back, look at it. What do you think of this, my friend, over here? And it begins an iterative process through which you're developing and constructing more and more interesting and kind of complex and powerful creations. So some examples of some of the things that have come out of our research group. And one of the things I want to talk about is Makey Makey. So this is a project of Jay Silver and Eric Rosenbaum. Both at the time that they created this were graduate students here at the Lifelong Kindergarten group. And the best way to show Makey Makey is through this amazing video that my friend Jay Silver made. So I'm going to paste this link into the chat. And I guess, Steve, you'll kick it off in some way so everybody hopefully starts. But we'll watch about a minute into it or so until Jay and Eric start talking with their sort of spiel.
Okay.
Do people have to click the link, Steve?
If it doesn't show up for you in the web tour, then yes, go ahead and click the link. But it should show up and start playing in your web tour.
Oh, great.
And if it shows up and doesn't start playing,
I see the window, but it's not playing for me.
So go ahead and click play.
Great. Cool. So Makey Makey is a hardware device that basically allows people to create their own interfaces to the computer. So in this example, you see Jay has created a Play-Doh controller with which to play Super Mario. So there's nothing fancy about this. It looks to the computer just like another keyboard, right? And as you can see, he was playing Pac-Man at first with the keyboard. But it allows you to draw with pencil, which is conductive, your own controller for Pac-Man. This is one of my personal favorites. He's filling up this water to play these troughs to play Dance Dance Revolution with. So there's the classic banana piano and now the cat photo booth, which is really great for your cat. So Makey Makey is actually being sold. You can buy it online. It's about $45. But the central idea is that we want to make all this sort of creativity accessible to people, right? So we can stop the video now that they're sort of chattering there. I guess just close your browser window. Great. So the philosophy there is world as construction kit, and this is what Jay is actually doing his sort of doctoral dissertation on, and he's about to actually speak about that. So the intention here is to make a toolkit that any of you can use, anybody in the world can use to make whatever they think is cool. So we give some really powerful examples. But it is not a piece of hardware that you use to make a banana piano. This is actually sometimes a hard concept for us to get across. They are not making a banana piano machine. What they're making is a machine that you can use to make anything you want, and that includes a banana piano. So that's what the sort of the video is trying to demonstrate here. So the next thing that that we'll talk about here in the next slide is, this is another project by a graduate student in our group who actually was previously in the group High-Low Tech, which is kind of our sister group here in the Media Lab, does a lot of fantastic things. So I'll paste the link in here. This is just a web page, it's not a video. But if you can kind of open it up in there, we can kind of just take a quick glance. It has a video embedded, but it's kind of long, so just kind of glance around here at what's going on there. So basically, this is a tool that Jennifer Jacobs created so that people would be able to create designs computationally. And so as you can see, there's some code in there, right? And there's lots of code interfaces for programming. Well, this one is really kind of focused on art. So it makes it so that programmatically people can use a couple lines of code, tweak lines of code, and make different designs get created. And then you can, the interesting fun thing as you scroll down on this dress code page is that after you've created a design, you can actually then use a vinyl cutter to cut out, or a cloth cutter to computationally cut out this design and make it into a dress. And that's just one example. I actually have a bunch of silkscreen t-shirts that are created from computational designs developed with this software. But again, it's not like making this dress, it's making a tool that anybody can use to make whatever it is that they think is interesting computationally, and then make t-shirts, dresses, what have you. That's kind of the powerful idea behind it, as World as Toolkit. So the thing that's probably the biggest project that's come out of our group is called Scratch. And Scratch is, let's see, I'm going to do this sharing thing here. Scratch is essentially a programming language that we developed so that instead of kids constantly being bombarded by media, right, so there's, you know, the internet, there's cartoons, etc., all these things coming at them, we wanted to create a tool so that they could push back and create their own things that they felt were interesting with computers. So again, it's kind of like making a toolkit that's more accessible than traditionally computers have been. So I will fire up the old screen share here and see if I can get the right thing to share. There we go. So hopefully, if everything is working, you guys are seeing a Firefox window. And then I'm going to take you to Scratch. So Scratch is free, and it's available to anybody with a web browser and Flash installed. And you can go to this website, and you can basically use this tool. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the basic intro to some of the things that it does, but you all can just go there and follow along in your own browser if you like. So I'm going to click on Create, and that's going to open up the actual Scratch editor. So the way Scratch works is that instead of having lines and lines of text like most programming languages, we created the commands in tiles. So as you can see, there's a move 10 steps brick right there, and I'm going to drag it out into the scripts area. And I'm going to give it a little time to refresh here, so hopefully you guys are following along. Now if I double click this, you'll see my cat actually moved. I clicked it twice. You can see the cat just hopped out a little bit. Well, if I want him to do something more than just move, I'm going to grab this turn 15 degrees brick here and snap it onto the bottom. So we actually get a lot of inspiration from Lego. We love them because they obviously have been working on these kinds of toolkits. So Scratch is kind of like Lego. Now if I click move 10 steps on my turn 15 degrees stack, you'll see the cat is kind of moving and turning a little bit, kind of slowly. But this is programming in computers, of course, right? So there's lots of different controls. There's something called if I click on this control palette, I'll get the forever brick. And it's a little different than the other ones, as you can see. So it has kind of a mouth in there. It's sort of a Pac-Man kind of shape. And I'm going to drag it slowly, hoping that you guys are getting the data fast enough to kind of see what's going on. And you'll see it's sort of surrounded the other blocks, the other two here. And if I click on it, you'll start to see I immediately have kind of a moving cat that's kind of like dancing around, moving in different sort of ways. So this is sort of an easy way to sort of dive in and create that doesn't present a lot of barriers to entry. This is a lot different from my first experience programming, right? When that was the Commodore 64 days. And anything that you typed wrong into the computer, the response that you got, I still remember it vividly, was syntax error. Basically, you did it wrong, which is not maybe the most helpful thing in the world. We've come a long way. Well, this way, there's not really any way that you can type anything wrong. And I think that that's like a nice way to make it really accessible and easier for people to kind of dive in there. So it's not only an editor for the creation of these projects, it's also a community, an online community for sharing the projects that have been created with this tool. So if we go to the Scratch homepage, hopefully you guys are still following along here, you can kind of see I'm logged in and there's some news things and what's happening. There's also featured projects right here. So these are all just new and kind of interesting things that people in the community have made that we thought were really awesome. So there's like my first animated drawings, and we can take a look at that. This is actually one of those things that may work a little bit better. Well, we can try it. We'll see if it works with the screen share. My first animated drawings. So press the green flag starts it off. It's kind of like a video, but it's programmatic. And they're actually showing something that they developed with Scratch. This is actually the programming that's drawing this design, so it's kind of a programmatic thing. And it's kind of long, but it's kind of cute there. Very simple. An awesome thing about Scratch is that every single thing that you find on the website, and we're just about, I guess we just passed 6 million projects that people have created and shared, the source code is available for. So if you want to make your own first animated drawings, you can see inside, you can see all the scripts that they use to make this drawing, and you don't have to start from scratch, pardon the pun. You can actually start tweaking it and changing it around, right? So if you want to draw in a different color, you can change this block any way that you want to a different color and that sort of thing, and make your own what's called a remix. So so let's see, I'm going to take us back to the home page again. Hopefully you guys are still kind of following on there.
It's working great,
Paper
by the
Minecraft.
way.
Wow, Heidi N. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Great, okay. So Paper Minecraft is so much fun. That is a project made by an awesome Scratcher who's actually a programmer in his day job, but spends a ton of time just making amazing projects. It's mind-blowing, that one. So that's just kind of one example. So there is somebody has made Minecraft in Scratch. So there are lots of great examples of really cool projects. I'll show you a couple of my other fun ones. We showed kind of a computational design. There's also, Scratch is a way to do, showcase the homemade creative stuff that you're doing. So this is my duct tape fashion designer set how-to. So they got this thing that sort of showed them how to make fashion designs and with duct tape, and they documented it on Scratch. So spacebar will show us kind of the next thing. They got the set, but you could, of course, just get your own duct tape with designs on it and choose a design. So they're walking us through a tutorial of how they did something in the physical real world, and we think that's really fun. There should be tape lines on the back. Pick your tape design, put it on, later. I'm done. So this is also a tool for documentation. Again, it's not just for videos or for games. It's really for anything computationally that you want to generate. Now below this, you'll see people saying, cool, amazing, great, it's super cool. Not much use of that said. There's different kinds of feedback here. So Scratch, again, it's also a platform for talking about the things that you're interested in, for people finding other people with similar kinds of interests. And of course, for the gamers out there, we can't. We always have to sort of show a couple of those that are powerful. And so I'll bring up a classic here by M44, Chop Shop. So this is kind of a platformer game, and as you can see, I'm playing it right now with I don't have a makey, but I just have my keyboard here, and it's kind of the standard thing. You jump around. It's got cool music, and it's pretty neat. As you can see, it's been around. It's got 27,000 views. Now, a really powerful thing is, as I said before, all that code is available for remixing, and you can actually see who has remixed it and what their remix looks like. So this is a remix. It started out as Chop Shop, but somebody named Sporax made something really awesome there. And there's something like over 300 variations of this source code that people have made because they basically liked Chop Shop. So you can kind of explore those and find out the relationships between them. So telling some of the stories about Scratch as a community is, as kind of the person who's been working, one of the main people working on the main online community for the past 5 years is, I think, like a powerful thing. I'm going to switch back here to the slides. Let's see. So Scratch is not like school in a lot of ways because, for one thing, the people who are on there in general are on there because they want to be. Now, that may be the case with school in some cases. I'm not going to knock school if people are into it, but Scratch is not a formal educational environment, right? So there's not a bunch of teachers. Some teachers are on Scratch, but uh-oh, I can't seem to navigate here. Oh no, am I frozen? Oh, okay. Dialog box, sorry about that. Still getting used to this. So we have also been working on, of course, ways to create platforms that people can use not only to create and share projects, but also to create and share kind of centers of interest, or sub-communities is another way of putting it. So you can see this is what's called a Scratch Studio. We created studios as places for people to gather together interesting projects and also have conversations and comments about them. It's really the beginning steps of creating new places to have sub-communities based on your interests. So this one's called Anime Academy in School. And a Scratcher just created this based on the platform we provided because they love anime and they love to be able to share things. So as you can see in the description, where all anime fans, students, hobbyists, and more gather to explore, create, discuss, and help fellow members of the school and community. Again, not something that we created. I kind of like anime, but I'm not a huge fan. Totally created from the community, by the community, and maintained by that. And that includes different roles in the community, talking about people being teachers in it and developing ideas and creating something that we found to be really, really exciting is lots and lots of tutorials, right? So we'll go down here and go to the next one. This is one of the tutorials that was in Anime Academy. It's called How to Draw Faces from the Front. So people are interested in drawing on Scratch, and so rather than just sort of saying, yes, I do this cool thing, they were like, oh, well, I'll show you exactly how I do it, which is a really exciting, inspiring part of it. I'm going to paste a link into here, and this is actually going to load a Scratch project page. Maybe you can fire it up, Steve. And you guys will have to, instead of hitting play like in a video, the way this works is you hit green flag. There it goes. Great. How to draw faces. So if you have Flash installed, which I hope you do, you hit that green flag tutorial, and it's kind of explaining to you, okay, this is what I'm going to go over. And if you use the arrow key, the right arrow key, you can kind of advance through this. So as you'll see the next frame, if you hit the right arrow key on your computer, is I always start with the jawline and nose, and then the mouth, and the mouth should be lined up right here. And you kind of scroll through here, you can see this whole development of a drawing technique that somebody just shared there. So do a second sketch to fix some things up, and you end up with kind of a really awesome face. Now, this is really one of, you can hit stop if the music is too noisy. This is really one of thousands and tens of thousands of projects that Scratchers have made. We thought, when we created Scratch, we thought we would make some Scratch project tutorials. We didn't know that so many other people would. And if you scroll down a little bit on this page, right below the project page in the comments area, you'll see this great comment from Broken Wonder. Very helpful and talented tutorial. The only thing I have to point out is how the ear is roughly the length between the top of your eye to the bottom of the nose. Same goes with the placement. Yeah, I didn't really cover that, did I, is the response. So this is something that we really love to see. It's not just people saying, hey, that's cool. It's also people actually giving constructive feedback to sort of help the artist or the creator of the tutorial develop whatever it is that they're doing. So you see lots of this feedback on games, on art, on all different kinds of projects. And as you can see over here on the right side, there's more studios with other drawing tutorials and that kind of thing. So I'll close this window out. So back to the squiggly line. So Scratch, again, like the Makey Makey, is a tool, right? And so the principles that guide how we think about that are low floor, wide walls, and high ceiling. All that really means is that there should be very low barrier to entry. It should be really easy to dive in and start making something relevant. Oh, thank you, red stop sign. Thanks, Steve. That's how you stop it. Low floor, wide walls, high ceiling. So basically, it should be really easy to jump into Scratch. We don't want you to have to know a lot of things beforehand. We don't want you to have a training session. We want to make it so you just mess around. And as you continually develop that messing around, you begin to understand and learn more things. You can dive in lots of different ways. Wide walls just means there should be a variety, many, many different things that you can make with this tool. And high ceiling means that even though there are many different things you can still make really, really complex, powerful things. So things that are computationally complex and really interesting. Also, it has to be easy to integrate media. So if you like Pokemon, then you should be able to immediately get an image from the internet of Pokemon and bring it into your Scratch project and start animating it, maybe make your own Pokemon fights. There are thousands of these Pokemon games that are kind of customized by Scratchers available in the community. If you search it, you'll find them. But that's not the only thing, of course. With 6 million projects, you have a good chance of finding something interesting when you pop anything into the search box. So Scratch does not teach, and this is an important distinction. Right now, actually, we're in the midst of the Scratch conference, and this is something that we always kind of try to emphasize to set ourselves and what we're trying to do apart from a lot of other ed tech initiatives to quote-unquote teach kids programming. Think about what that means, just the sort of the construction of the sentence. teach, like when something teaches a programming language to a kid, that sort of means that the kid or the adult or whoever it is sort of passive, right? The teaching is being done to them. That's not what we're interested in. What we're interested in is giving people a powerful tool. They're going to be the ones driving the process as a learner. And that's, I think, a really important distinction, and one of the areas that we share a lot of affinity with unschooling is that it's really got to be interest-driven. So projects, peers, passion, and play is, again, one of the things that's like the motto of our Scratch conference that's going on right now. In fact, some of my friends are probably peeking in, wondering why I'm staring into and talking to a computer while it's going on. But anyway, so projects, creating things that are awesome, peers, friends that you're interested in, you share interests, you love, passion, of course, that's got to be there, and then play. So that's kind of one of our goals here. So Scratch workshops. When we think about like a workshop with Scratch, like that's something where we're going to expose people to Scratch maybe for the first time. We think about it in a way that's, I think, different from school and worth talking a little bit about. So creative constraints. We found that when you give somebody a really powerful tool and you say, hey, look at this thing, you can make anything you want with it, the initial reaction tends to be, oh, God, I don't know where to start. It's too overwhelming. It's like too much kind of freedom in some ways, right? Now, we love it when people can take that ball and roll with it. And I think that maybe in some ways unschoolers are better prepared to sort of deal with that situation and go, all right, I'm going to dive in this way, probably than most kids from school. But for a lot of people, you kind of need to ease them in. So the way we think about it is, let's create a structure in a workshop that gives a constraint. So there is something that they have to be doing or thinking about that kind of gives them a realm within which to work. But within that realm, there must be a lot of room for their own creativity and their own self-expression, right? So here's an example of a project, and I'll show you. Actually, the links are on the slide here. Steve, can you get them out of there, or maybe I have them somewhere else?
I'll just type them in.
These are both videos. Oh, cool. Actually, I just found them right here. There's the first one. So this is just a quick little video you can fire up for us, Steve. Just a minute, kind of demonstrating what the core idea of this workshop is. Actually, I just ran this workshop at the Scratch Conference like an hour and a half ago, and I'll show you another video of the finished project. But we'll start here with the beginning, and I guess hit play. It didn't really open for me.
I haven't opened it yet. I wanted to just let you know that sometimes when you've been talking during the video, I've had trouble balancing the audio and I have a hard time hearing you. I don't know if anybody else has had that issue.
Oh.
Just to let you know.
Should I crank up my gain there?
That probably would help.
Okay. I think I have a mic button here. Is that okay?
The slider above the mic. Yep.
Is that any better? Check. Great. All right, so as we see here, let's do that again. You drop a ball in here. This hits a sensor that's made by Lego called the Lego WeDo, and that tells the Scratch project, hey, the ball has come. So then the ball goes through the project, and then it triggers this WeDo motor. So WeDo is this little piece of hardware that connects Scratch to the real world. And then it tilts the next tilt sensor on the WeDo on the next computer and makes kind of a chain reaction, right? So we developed this because we were like, we want to make it so that people can have these computers that have links that are receiving an input from the left and sending out an input, and usually in the form of a ball or something along those lines, to the right. So the next link actually shows you what one of those workshops look like. So what I did was I said, hey, what I want you guys to do is receive a ball from the left and then send a ball to the right. Steve, if I paste this into my browser, is everybody else going to see it, or I guess I'll just paste it into here?
You can do either. Perfect, and I'll
there you go.
I'll change it.
Cool. All right. So if you hit play on that, you'll see an example of this workshop from 2012. 3, 2, 1. So it launches in the computer. The ball kind of moves across the computer here. And then you can see it's kind of like moving up into the physical world, into all the other computer. The video doesn't quite do it justice, but you'll see it also here in a second, actually moving through the physical world. Each one of these is connected in a link. Now, I didn't tell them how to get that ball from one computer to the next. If I did, that'd be a really boring workshop. It would be do what the teacher says as usual. What I said was, that's up to you. You have to get the ball from the left to the right, then you have to receive a ball from somebody and send a ball, and the rest go crazy. And they do. They always do. They come up with really amazing, inspiring things. Here you can see the fish swallowing the ball and then spinning to the other side and spitting it back out again. So these are really, really fun workshops. And we do them. So hopefully you guys are about at the end of that one. So again, the idea of that kind of workshop is to create a constraint, but then make sure that there's enough creative freedom within it that it's interesting, powerful, and people can customize based on what they care about, what they're interested in, what medium they like to work with. And that's again sort of giving the ownership and driving the process to them.
Amos, can I interrupt for 1 second?
So back to this creative. Yes, please go ahead.
So I think Peggy asked a question that's a really interesting question. She said, that looks like so much fun. Do they have to be able to articulate what they learned after they create something like that? So that would be sort of, Peggy was a school principal. She's a terrific contributor in this community. But does that reflect kind of an educational mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is actually something where I think maybe we should do a little bit better. So a lot of people teach programming saying, here's what a function is, here's what messaging is, here's what all these abstract concepts are. And then the expectation is that once somebody kind of understands that vocabulary, they're a programmer. We wanted to turn that on its head. So what we wanted to do, was to sort of make it so, don't worry about all that stuff. Here are these tools, and of course they are related to all those powerful concepts. But you can use the tool without necessarily knowing what the concept is. And so we end up with kids who I think probably would score worse on a test of programming skill, and yet their programming skill is thousands of times better than the person who would score better than them on the test, right? So I almost wish that at the end, after I don't want to burden them with the abstraction at the beginning necessarily, unless they want it, that's fine. But I do wish we did a better job just to maybe say, oh, you made a project that uses functions and procedures and messaging and all these different concepts. Incidentally, in case you want to know the names of those concepts, because naming is powerful. It's useful to talk about things. Here they are, but I just don't want to put the cart before the horse, as I think, unfortunately, many people do when they teach programming. I agree, and Peggy, I think that's a great point. They should, and that's really I think that's a valid criticism what we do. I wish that we had better tools to sort of say, here's what it is that you have demonstrated here, just so that they can actually, represent their knowledge to other people in the programming world, right? And that's something I'm interested in working on too. Yep. Great point, great question. And thanks again, Steve, for jumping in there, because I can't always monitor the chat here, so stop me the next time there's something here. I'll try to keep an eye on it as well. All right. So the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is that there's a lot of affinities between what we do and the maker movement, right? And so the maker movement, I think there was another talk, I really wanted to see it, but I think I'm busy with this other conference about that. I was interested to see it. But the maker movement, as a summary, is maybe some people say it's born a lot out of MIT and MIT Media Lab. At least a lot of the people who are involved in maker education are people like some of which have graduated from Lifelong Kindergarten Group, a lot of which came from MIT, and kind of the culture of you want to do something, just go ahead and do it. Here are the tools that I think is really powerful at MIT, and maker spaces, some people say, were sort of born here. But there's definitely the Make magazine is kind of a nexus there. Make magazine is just, I really can't recommend it more highly. It's amazing. You can get it, and it just says, here are how to make a million different awesome things that you might like. So it's about kind of empowering people to be creative, often with digital technology. So there's a Make magazine cover in the slide about 3D printing. So that's a really cool tool that I think is using digital computational stuff that hasn't been available before but is now. And there's also a picture here of Maker Faire. This is the giant octopus on a truck that shoots flames. Hey, it's sort of it's a good example of the kind of things that people show at Maker Faire, which is it happens every year. Actually, there are many different ones happening all year round nowadays, but it started out in the Bay Area where people got together and were like, hey, I made this awesome thing, check it out. So it's like a massive show and tell festival with thousands of people showing awesome, amazing things that they've made. And again, a lot of that kind of ethos of, hey, you can just make it. If you think that's cool, here's how to do it, go for it. that I think is really kind of a key value of the maker movement and really, really powerful. I also wanted to show Instructables also grew out of some people who were from the Media Lab. So Instructables is a website where anyone can share instructions on how they made something. So I have a profile on there, and I show how I made different kinds of things that I thought were cool and fun. But there are, I don't know how many millions of different kinds of things. Like if you need to build something, if I need to build something, I just go to Instructables, like a compost bin once, and I was like, oh, there it is. Great, fantastic. And I could, sort of riff on other people's ideas, take inspiration. It's also just fun to see the cool stuff that people have made. So the kind of the pedagogy of the maker movement tends to be very kind of hands-on, go for it. It's not really hard. Just dive into it and get help from people whenever you can. Some people who I think are articulating the values of the maker movement in a really great way are Sylvia Martinez and Gary Stager, and both of them have connections also to some stuff that's gone on at MIT that I'll talk a little bit about more. But they have this book that recently came out called Invent to Learn. And this is a little bit of a blurb here on the slide from the sort of press release about it. As you can see, it's like, yes, there's a lot of technology, but at its heart is a plea to place the child at the center of the learning experience. Now that's, I think, another area of shared values there. So schools may purchase the technology of the maker movement, but the greatest potential will be realized when creativity, construction, and children are the focus. So these guys I'm very well aligned with, and I'm excited to see them kind of taking the time to articulate those things. And they are, I think, you would call kind of constructionists. So we'll go into the next slide and talk a little bit about that. So Constructionism is a sort of a theory of learning that was developed by Seymour Papert. And Seymour Papert, he studied developmental psychology under Jean Piaget, which was a developmental psychologist who really did a lot of the core founding work on it. I think it's still really interesting and powerful. He's a little bit maybe fallen out of favor in psychology, but basically his conclusion was that the way that learning occurs is that people interact with the world in such a way that they create an internal model of the world, right? And you can't just sort of give people a valid internal model. You can give them hints to the creation of it, but really the way it's powerful is that you learn by doing, and by doing and sort of interacting around knowledge, around things, you are creating that model. So Constructionism said, more specifically, let's create the tools or toolkits that will help, that will sort of strengthen that process, right? So Seymour was really interested in mathematics. He was a mathematician. And he lamented the fact that a lot of times mathematics instruction in schools was worksheets, right? So one of the great essays that he wrote comparing was this idea of compare what the art class creates versus compared what the math class creates. In the art class, he had to observe when he was in a school they were making soap sculptures. They were these cool, really sculptures that the kids were making. They could bring them home. They could show their parents. They could say, look at this thing that I created in the world in my art class. The equivalent artifact that they could take home from the math class was a worksheet. The worksheets, Seymour felt, and I agree, are not very interesting or powerful. So he invented Logo, which is a programming language that was designed for kids, and this came out in the 80s. I actually was one of the first things I programmed with, to actually bring the ideas of mathematics into an actionable kind of space. So with Logo, you could program, and it was a way to kind of have mathematics be alive and actuating and working. So there was a turtle, it could draw things, and that was sort of the first idea. Scratch really is sort of the next generation in some ways of Logo. Seymour Papert was the kind of the faculty advisor of Mitchell Resnick, who's the director of the group I work for now, he's now kind of the Lego professor of education here at Media Lab. So it's really carrying on kind of a tradition of thinking here. So Seymour said that basically there's two ways to think about it with computers in schools, and this was a big deal in the 80s when he was really working on it, right, and still is today. There's instructionism and constructionism, right? So instructionism says to get better education, we have to improve it. We have to use computers, and we'll just have the computers kind of teach the kids. That's not what I like. That's not what Seymour liked. The alternative, he says, is constructionism, right? And that's where instead of having the computer tell the kids what they need to know, which unfortunately is still a very popular notion, I think, even today, we should be making the computer as a toolkit that kids use to learn. So it's, again, there's this sort of distinction between teaching, right? The computer teaches the passive student who just sits there and absorbs, blah, versus the computer being a tool that the kid is using to interact with powerful ideas, right? So like with mathematics, with media that they love, with programming, and that's a very, very different alignment that I think is key. And so that is some of the thinking of constructionism behind, the maker movement, is that sort of value. That's cool. We have some logo users here. That's fantastic. It's good stuff. It's still great. So Scratch actually still has the turtle. If you look in the pen palette of Scratch, you'll see a lot of familiar kind of commands that you'll recognize from the logo days. So unschooling and constructionism, they're both learner-driven. So these are some of the core ideas where I think there's a lot of overlap here, right? So there's a big value on learner driving the process, and then it has to often be based on their kind of interests. And that's at least what I found so powerful about being at Not Back to School Camp, is just seeing how exciting and excited people were to share the things that they thought were interesting and powerful. That's contagious. When I go to a workshop where somebody's talking about something that they love, I'm immediately interested. And now if they're talking about something that they have to talk about, I'm much less interested. So the process, which Blake was mentioning as well, is really, really important here. They're both often open-ended, sometimes closed-started. Again, it can be overwhelming. Hey, you can learn, do anything you want. My eyes, my head explodes, right? So maybe I think it's okay in unschooling. Some people would disagree, to sort of say, well, here's an area. Find something in that area that is powerful to you. And there's also this emphasis on doing. So let me read the comments here. Yeah. Well, it's sad about the MIT students. I would think that they'd be better with the circuits, but we have a lot of different programs. Maybe they, not all of them are into technology, but yeah, that's interesting. So then I'll talk a little bit about John Holt. So it wasn't all total agreement, and actually to find out more about this before the talk, I ended up contacting a friend of mine, Aaron Falbell, who wrote this quote. And Aaron actually was at MIT Media Lab as a graduate student in the 80s. Working with Seymour Papert, so the creator of Constructionism, and he also he met and got interested in, started to hang out with John Holt at the same time. This was shortly before, I guess it was about a year, I think, before John Holt died. Aaron got to know him. And he has this reminiscence, which is published in The Legacy of John Holt, which I'm reading right now, which is a fantastic book. I really recommend it highly. So he remembered talking with John about Seymour's idea of this learning environment, like let's create an environment that's conducive to learning. Which is really popular, and Holt rejected it in some ways. He said, this is not what we need to be worrying about, is designing these special places where magical learning happens. I don't make any distinction in my own life between learning and other pursuits. It's always happening, essentially, is the way I take that quote. And teaches, and he seemed to question the usefulness of talking about learning. He preferred to speak about concrete activities. I wish I could articulate as well as Aaron did in the conversation that we had about these sorts of distinctions, but I think that while there are a lot of shared values about learner-driven processes between these two things, John Holt's criticism was much more broad. It was a social criticism, and it was talking about not only the process of learning, but about the social institutions that exist in our culture and that drive that are behind school and how they affect that process. Seymour really felt that computers, once they got into school, would revolutionize that process. He called them a Trojan horse, so that as soon as we got the computers in there, all of a sudden people will be more interested in having the process be student-driven, because look at the amazing things that they can do, that it would change the entire model of education. So that's a really powerful idea, and that's something that we are continually sort of trying to do with Scratch and design-based thinking, is to sort of make these ideas of learner-driven education available in schools. There's been about 30 years of it going on. It's really hard to judge how much success is going on there, but I would have to admit, the first to admit that I think it's been limited. I think that school as an institution has a lot of power, and that while we can try to insinuate some of these values about being learner-driven in maybe a 45-minute computer science period, that's not a lot of leverage when you compare that to the entire power of the institution and its inertia here. So Holt's criticism, I think, is probably borne out here. If I had to bet on which of those two was right from the assertions they were making in the 80s, I guess I'd have to go with Holt. Yep. So what does it mean to make? I wanted to bring this up because I'm really excited about the maker movement, because I think that it does emphasize agency in a really powerful way. What I'm concerned about is that, is it going to be co-opted into just another way to teach? Again, look at the way that the verbs work here. Teach kids STEM, right? So, okay, now the way that we're going to make these kids learn something that we, as the authority figures in school or in institutions, think that they need to learn is through making. Now, if that begins to happen, I'm worried about the future of making. And there's always a lot of power and institutional inertia in the way people think about education that I'm concerned is going to be pushing it in that direction. So, or is it a way to give kids tools for empowerment, tools to create things based on their own interest? That is the idea that I think is super powerful and super exciting. And that's happening in maker spaces all around the country and all around the world right now. So I want to get behind that. There's a lot of people in the maker movement who sort of see that distinction and think it's powerful. Unschoolers already have those kinds of distinctions and those values. So this is, I see a way for an interesting and really powerful cross-pollination to be happening, right? So unschoolers can find people who are doing making. They can find maker spaces. They can find in their local area. They can find schools that are doing quote-unquote maker initiatives and dive into it and already have the understanding and the knowledge of how to take an interest and grow and develop it in a powerful way. And they can show examples of how they've done that by documenting the cool things that they've learned and discovered. I want unschoolers to join this conversation because I think it's an important conversation globally about education, and I think it's an opportunity to get some of the values that unschoolers have into the doors of a lot of other people's lives so that they can experience them and have the chance to be creative, to express things that are moving and powerful to them. They're not that far apart, making and unschooling, so I want us to get in there and drag it rather than have it be dragged the other way towards another tool for teaching STEM. And as you know, there's going to be a lot more money pushing it in one direction than in another. So we're going to need to really kind of get active. So this is I guess an invitation really at the end of this talk for everybody to dive in, get involved in making. It already is your own kind of unschooling thing, and I think you'll recognize the qualities of it when you get into it if you haven't already. So thank you all very, very much. It's really been a pleasure to talk with you all. And I think, do we have a little bit of time left for questions or thoughts? I can try to answer anything that you guys think I can help with.
We absolutely do. So I'm clapping for you. It's hard to find the applause button now in this new version of Collaborate, but you hover over the smiley face and click on applause. I'm still just stunned at the connections here, and of course, they make perfect sense, but this has been really, really fun for me. If you have a question for Amos, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. I'm going to give everybody microphone privilege, so you just turn your talk button on if you'd like to say something. Amos, as much as I feel steeped in this ed tech movement, I still have trouble determining the difference between constructionism and constructivism.
Yeah. So constructivism is really kind of the it's the originating philosophy. So that's what Piaget made, and he was making that really an idea about developmental psychology and learning for all ages, all things. It's very, very broad. So this is essentially trying to explain how people learn totally in general. Constructionism is kind of what I would say is maybe a fork or a remix, right? So it's primarily founded in constructivism, but what it says is that there are these ways to make powerful learning environments and learning tools that are better ways to help learners create those internal kind of schema, those internal models of what's going on in the world. That there's a difference between saying if a kid wants to learn computers, you give them, let's say, BASIC in Commodore 64, as I was given, versus Scratch. That the Scratch as a tool, even though it's still being used to explore their own interests, is going to be more powerful than some of the old text-driven languages, and therefore it's more of a constructionist tool and fits a kind of a constructionist value. But really, they're strongly related. Constructionism isn't trying to explain how kids learn about Magellan and history and that sort of thing. So it has its own kind of realm. It's a subset of constructivism and kind of I guess, a refinement of that idea when it comes to a particular realm.
Okay, you've got some questions here. Peggy asks, is it harder for parents to embrace making as learning because that's not the way they learn, or at least what they remember from their schooling?
Yes, absolutely. So a colleague of mine, Rika Rose Roque, has actually been working on sort of workshops around making with parents and kids together. And so she's been writing about that and researching about it and coming up with a lot of fascinating things. I encourage you to kind of Google her and find her work. I think she's about to put up kind of a curriculum guide about how to run these workshops with both parents and kids. So when oftentimes, if people have kind of gone through school, they have this notion of this is how learning works. So they come into a room, first of all, with the expectation that they're going to be bored to death and somebody's going to talk at them just only with the PowerPoint telling them things that they need to sort of memorize and absorb. So we have to kind of break that expectation with people very quickly in the beginning of a workshop and get their hands, kind of involved. But yes, we do sometimes get this sort of pushback of like, sometimes people actually go to the point that they think that real learning must not be fun, right? Because in school, a lot of the learning they did was really hard and unpleasant. So if you see the kids actually with smiling faces and, creating the things that they want to do, it can't actually really count. And these are just a few of kind of the perceptions about learning that we really have to kind of push back against. Also, the interface is very playful and that sort of thing, and they think, oh, serious learning would have a bunch of equations and it would be hard and very difficult to understand. Just a few of the kind of preconceived notions that we're often pushing.
Feels like that's reflective of an even deeper kind of division in terms of our sort of a cognitive dissonance in terms of our thinking about learning. We see it as being obedient and compliant, and that sometimes stops us from feeling comfortable with self-directed and maybe not as constrained. There was another question here. Claw asks, which age is the best to start constructionism and instructionism, and how much do the parents need to know to guide this process?
So we actually just released Scratch Junior, and that's really designed for about kindergarten-age kids. Now, I myself I think it's a great tool if you want to teach your kid who's 5 years old programming. Then I think Scratch Junior is the best tool by far. I have a little bit of compunction about, there's enough to learn in the real world now. I'm not so sure that we have to start them on computers and programming quite that soon. Scratch is designed to be kind of ages 8 and up. But really I think it's up to you as a parent, how you want to kind of dive in and when you want to start doing those things. I guess the main value that I think should be there is like there are a lot of ed tech tools, a lot of software things that are supposed to teach programming. Is your child actually, learning and creating something that's valuable and interesting to them? If not, then I would sort of question the value of it in some cases. Just earlier today in a keynote, Mitch Resnick, the director of the group, was saying that he feels like a lot of these tools that are out there to teach programming, which is a big fad, like at code.org, they're kind of like crossword puzzles, and those are cool. Like, nothing against crossword puzzles, but asking somebody to create or to do a crossword puzzle is very different from, asking them to write a poem. You know what I mean? The crossword puzzle is sort of fixed. The poem is more sort of creative and expressive. And that's like the side of this that we want to be in. We want to be, helping the kids create stuff. So I guess I would say that, I'm a fan of constructionism as opposed to instructionism. I don't really recommend instructionism because that to me implies that the learner is not empowered, that they're just passively kind of absorbing some things. Of course, it's fine for people to take classes, to watch Khan Academy videos if they actually are interested in the thing that's being discussed or taught. And that was a great point that I think was made in Guerrilla Learning. If you want to use school as part of your educational process, that's awesome. But I just don't think that it should be sort of like seen as the only option, especially if you don't like what's going on in there. So I hope that answers the questions. These are great questions. I'm trying to do them justice here, but
you're one of many today who have used the word agency, which I find to be a really interesting word coming into currency in a lot of ways in this regard. It feels like we have these these two different ways of viewing education. And one is that sort of for those who can afford it and have typically been in the elite class, sort of an understanding of the value of all of these things which allow someone to become sort of agency directed or driven. And then another sort of system which is much more about compliance. And it feels like you could even trace that back to Plato and Socrates, right? You've got these sort of two different conceptions of education. Are we seeing is your use of the word agency indicative of a sea change? Are we beginning to see more clearly on a large scale, or is this still something that's more in the shadows?
Wow, I really wish that it was a sea change, and I hope that it is. I hope that this is kind of the beginnings of. You could also describe it as a really big pendulum swing, from kind of like people sit back and absorb things to people create and are empowered to do things that are interesting to them. Because I think that as a way of learning, that will have a lot of effects on many other things in our culture and our society. I wish I could tell you that I was sure that that's what was going on. However, I think that there are a lot of signs that there are powerful institutions that really aren't changing very quickly, if at all. But there is this sort of increased notion around the maker movement of that. Okay, that is somehow part of it. That it should be at least somewhat driven by their interests. So that I find to be really encouraging. A lot of schools are talking about building maker spaces. How they build and implement those ideas remains to be seen. And just because, for example, you bring Scratch into a school doesn't mean that you don't just, tell them, do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now you get an A. I mean, you can do that with Scratch, even though we designed it to be a constructionist tool. It doesn't guarantee that it'll be used that way. So I am encouraged by the signs and that the conversation is up about agency, that it's becoming, a word that's in education. But there's been a lot of great words batted around in education for a long time, and reform, and you can sort of see we're pretty much where we were for a long time ago, or maybe a little bit worse in some ways, with the more and more adding of the things into the agenda for kids. So
my personal heartache is the poor, beat up, battered librarians who finally have something that people want, which is the library as makerspace. But it feels like we can't stop providing the library as intellectual privacy and freedom. So if we replace the library with makerspaces, I worry that we're trading one great thing for another.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, actually, this is interesting you mentioned that, because I'm really interested in sort of adding libraries, or adding makerspaces to libraries as a supplement, because as somebody who cares about agency and unschooling, that's where I want to be. I want to be in a place that's in the community where if somebody wants to, they come there and they create something that's cool. That's very different from being in a school where oftentimes you have to go and do something in a makerspace. Very, very important, significant change in the attitude, right? So I'm so excited about makerspaces in libraries. I don't want it to replace the intellectual repository and also the social nature of libraries, where you can meet people, have workshops on things that aren't at all related to technology. But I think that it's a great fit. I think making should be brought into that as an accessible kind of addition to what libraries do. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I'm actually kind of looking for new opportunities now, leaving the Boston area. Want to live someplace a little bit smaller, like maybe a medium-sized college town or something, and ideally work in a library or maybe in a school that's got really great unschooling values. If that, I think that.
I need to introduce.
So yeah.
So we need to introduce you to Pam Moran and Iris Sokol at Albemarle School District in Virginia. So they're in Charlottesville, Virginia. Look them up, and you'd be a perfect fit. Hey, thanks, Amos.
That's amazing, because I just moved here from Charlottesville 6 years ago to come to work at MIT Media Lab. So, and I used to be a family therapist and with the kids in Albemarle School. So yeah, I really need to call them up and chat.
Because they're doing a lot of libraries as makerspaces there. And Pam and Ira are probably in my book, from the view I have, the most proactive creators of a new school district system, because they have great board support. Okay, yeah, I'll send you an email introducing you.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay. Hey, thank you. That was terrific.
I'd love it. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming and for the great questions. If anybody has questions later on, I assume that like my email address is somewhere. I didn't put it on the slide. Anyway, it's amos@scratch.mit.edu. Also, my website is just amos.net, and that's got links to contact me. So amos.net, you can find me there, and I'm happy to chat about this stuff because it's powerful, exciting ideas.
So glad to meet you. Thanks, Amos. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. We'll see some of you tomorrow, we hope. Bye now.
All right. Bye.